our panel here with utilities and infrastructure discussions that we've got. And I'd like to introduce our moderator will be Phil Saxka, and Phil is the chief scientist of Blue Forest, a nonprofit conservation finance organization, and he's going to moderate the panel of energy, water, and transportation agency representatives. And I will turn it over to you, Phil. It's great to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
First, I think it goes without saying, wanting to acknowledge the previous panel and the conversation that was had just a minute ago, and that we're going to be shifting pretty hard into infrastructure and utilities, but wanting to thank the previous panel, Will, and particularly Emily's courage and what she talked about today. So first, appreciating that and acknowledging that we are going to be talking more about utilities and infrastructure. And there is some overlap that we'll talk about with Indigenous communities, but that conversation certainly challenged me, as I'm sure it did many in the room, and acknowledge that our organization has a long way to go with our relationship with Indigenous communities as well. So as I was reflecting about this panel, I was thinking back to a conversation that we had been having at Blue Forest with a flood control district. There are no flood control districts represented up here, so I can tell this story. And we were working on a watershed scale restoration project. Watershed scale projects cost somewhere between $100 and $200 million for initial fuels reduction, metal restoration, those sorts of things. And we talked to the flood control district about downstream flood, post-fire flood risk that they could experience if we weren't starting to manage the upper watersheds in a more resilient fashion. And at the end of the meeting, at the end of the discussion, the flood control district turned to me and said, "Phil, I love your project. I really like it. I want to participate. But here's my problem. I have $5 billion that I need to get out the door for levee improvements in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what I need to focus on. So come talk to me in 5 to 10 years, and we could talk about participating in your project again." And we were certainly looking for funding partners on that project, and it left, I think, us at Blue Forest starting to think about, what is the mission of each of our agencies and our utilities and our organizations, and where can we start to build partnerships where there's a lot of overlapping interests. Everyone here on the panel, everyone here today is interested in managing and reducing wildfire risk. And yet we all have our own individual ways in which we do that, our own goals and objectives. And so today's panel is really to talk about how do we start to come together around the planning and prioritization, the metrics and data that we're using, as well as the implementation and resources, capacity, and funding. And I think it's not just talking about it here today, but it's how do we start to make real commitments in our own organizations in ways that we've started to do that. And that was what Patrick's comment when we started today was, we're starting those conversations, we're starting those partnerships, but how do we leverage those in a way that we're starting to build more by working together than any one agency or utility could do with the resources that they have at hand. And I think to kick off today's discussion, I have a couple of slides that I'll go through quickly. I don't know. Oh, there you go. Forced. And so the first one is really looking at the risk of wildfire to high value resources and assets across California. So this was a 22 report by PowerLogix looking across the state. And as with all wildfire maps, more red is more bad. But what I like about this map is that it shows not just where those assets actually exist, but it's everything from where does the ignition point of a fire that then leads to a fire of a size that then intersects those assets exists. And so what are the areas we really need to be looking at managing for our high value assets in a way that isn't just tied to where those assets exist on the land. If you want to move it to the next slide, they then looked at the outcomes of the risk. And this is a a net value change. And so it's an index. The numbers don't mean a whole lot, but the important thing is they're all negative. So we're just facing loss here. We're facing loss to our water infrastructure, and that's drinking water in this case. We're facing loss to our communications and electricity infrastructure. And sorry, Lisa, they didn't include roads in this. And then to, to people and communities. And so when you think about the hydropower that they didn't include and the roads that didn't include, these are all looking pretty significant decreases, specifically due to wildfire risk across the state and certainly in Southern California. And so next slide there. And so we've talked a lot about what are those solutions that we want to implement across the landscape, particularly across Southern California to address wildfire risk. I'm not going to talk about them more here, but the thing that we wanted to get at with this panel is how do we merge these, forest restoration initiatives with the infrastructure vegetation management that utilities are doing every day? And how do we combine them to maximize our resilience for communities and for utilities in a way, again, that no organization or entity can do on their own? And as an example of this, the next slide shows investments in utility hardening infrastructure. We're in excess of $20 billion, right? Looking at what they estimate to spend, over 23 to 25. And of that, just vegetation management alone is expected to expend $2.7 billion, which matches the state's investment in $2.7 billion of fuels reduction in forests. And so the question that I think we want to get at the panel today is $5.4 billion in vegetation management later, by 2025, where do we want to be? And what do we do with the next $5.4 billion in investment? And how do we maximize that across agencies and utilities? So with that, I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves and a little bit about their work and their agencies. Lisa, I guess we'll start at the far end of the table and come this way. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. My name is Lisa Worthington, and I've been a part of the task force for 7 years. So when it was in the conference room behind the governor's office, where you rub the head of the California State Bear statue and acknowledge the CHP holding the door open. It was a phenomenal beginning, and a lot of the foundational people that were part of that task force are still here. So the longevity and commitment and momentum that Jennifer and Joe, Chief Tyler, Jennifer Eberline talked about, I feel is already underway. It's the swelling and scaling up that we're all experiencing that we want to see continue to succeed. So for Caltrans, that meant the birth of a emphasis on land management, specifically looking at not only our engineered assets, very extensive engineered assets in roads and bridges and culverts, et cetera, but also the land and the context that the highway system is in. A ribbon of state highways touching every county. 70% of our highways are in rural communities, an essential lifeline for people's lives and the economic engine of California. So we have the birth of a focus on our natural assets now. And I want to acknowledge all the Caltrans people that made an effort to come, that are part of the BMP, both in the field, our field crew, supervisors that are local, but then also the professional support staff that came from around the state, and our executive team that's here. Thank you for including Caltrans in the funding and the leadership role that we need to take for not only transportation and infrastructure, but as a critical part of the community context. So pass it on to my right.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Woodside. I'm with the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District. We are a groundwater manager in the San Bernardino area. So that's about 80 miles north of here, if you're not familiar with our geography. The San Bernardino Valley provides a local water supply for about 1 million people in San Bernardino and Riverside counties. And our interest in wildfire really has been sparked Sorry about that. Uh, our interest has been really motivated by 2/3 of our water comes from the San Bernardino National Forest and the forest above us. So that's led our agency and a wide range of partners to work together to develop a headwaters resiliency partnership that really is intended to use our each individual agency and nonprofit and all the different partners we have, use their strengths, work together, and use the different assets that each of us have. So as we look as a water manager, um, I would say in general, Southern California is a little bit more slower to get to water agencies understanding the importance of the forest compared to Central and Northern California, but we're coming along. And it's something that our district has been committed to. Both our board of directors and our general manager are very firmly committed to really working together with all the partners to manage the forest for the benefit of all of us together.
I'm Dave Guzman. I'm the Senior Manager for Southern California Edison Vegetation Management and Forestry Division. I've been in the utility industry for 27 years. I've started my career in the Law Claims Division. I was an investigator and had the fortunate opportunity to investigate wildland fires, including the Grass Valley Fire of 2007. I also was involved with some of the enhanced clearance efforts that followed that fire. I'm currently, as I mentioned, the senior manager in our vegetation management group, and have been involved with the most recent developments of enhanced clearances and where we can get better as a utility in our fight against wildfires. So definitely excited to be on this panel and see how we can contribute and be a partner to all the agencies that are here to get better at what we're doing. But listening and learning is my intention, and definitely want to be able to share what we're doing and how that can help others as well.
All right. And I'm Tom Porter. I am the Director of Emergency Management at San Diego Gas and Electric. So I deal with all things planning for emergencies in that space. And kind of my history, I recently retired from CAL FIRE and from Sacramento. But about half of my career was here in San Diego. Working as a forester all the way up through the unit chief level. And during that time in the early 2000s, or 2000 specifically, we were having a pretty major beetle episode killing our pine trees in the mountain areas. And lo and behold, while the agencies knew what was going on and we were talking about it amongst ourselves, U.S. Forest Service, BLM, CAL FIRE, CDF at the time, actually. We actually were called together by San Diego Gas and Electric, the company I work for now. Tim Node, I don't know if you're here or maybe online, but Tim was going to try and be here today. He was one of the early people to note that there was a real utility hazard that was starting to occur, particularly on Palomar Mountain. Year later, so we met at Uwima Water District in the office. We were crammed in there like sardines, steam coming out the windows. There were so many of us in there because it was such a big deal. And that was in May 20, almost 24 years ago. We started there, and that turned into three groups that met. One in San Diego, FAST, Forest Area Safety Task Force. This is in 2002. And then two MAST working groups, Mountain Area Safety Task Forces in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And we were looking at the hazards that were occurring from the beetle kill and the trees that were dying, and the hazards that they were going to cause, both the road infrastructure, blockage of roads. This is morbid, but one of the things that the San Bernardino MAST did was determine how many body bags they needed to have staged on the mountain. That's how serious it was. So move forward. And show of hands, how many, I know you're out there, so how many of you were part of a MAST or a FAST or a RAST? I'll get to that in a second. So there are a few of us. So then that turned to a regional area safety task force in like around 2007, 2008. We had a lot of federal money that came in. We had this great collaborative workspace. We were putting everything on the same map. We were working together, identifying where there were gaps, making sure there wasn't overlap in project areas. And then that, lo and behold, gave us an opportunity to springboard to the southern part of the Sierras when the mortality moved there in the teens, and build a statewide task force that Lisa mentioned, the tree mortality task force, and that was at the Sacramento level, the precursor to this organization. Then there was the forest management task force, very short-lived, that then turned to the wildfire and forest resiliency task force that you see here today, with the leadership and the absolute power and effort of state, federal, and local governments all coming together, nonprofits coming together to do something that works. These collaborative efforts, and the reason I'm taking you down this whole road is these collaborative efforts work. We did it with paper maps in the 2000 era. Now we have toolkits, resource kits, tracking tools that we can all watch what everybody's doing across the state. Incredible tools. And what I wanted to just kind of wrap this to is, this is not an effort that's going unnoticed. I had the chance to be on a task force in British Columbia after their horrible fire seasons. And for the last 6 months, we've been building a program, and they have recognized all of this that's happening in California, and they are moving forward in a very rapid way and modeling it after this task force. So the work here is good. The work here is not finished. It will never be finished. And this time, those other efforts kind of dwindled. This time we have to make it last. And we have to make this ask last. All right. So, and I did not acknowledge, but I will now, the traditional lands of the Kumeyaay, Degano, Luiseño, and individual tribal affiliates that we are all on. And thank you very much for the 4 generations of my family that have been honored enough to live in this space. So thank you. If you're still out and listening, I really appreciate that. My family does too. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caroline Thomas Jacobs. I'm director of a new state agency, relatively new. We're 2.5 years old, called the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety. And I just want to say I'm really appreciative of the invite to be here and present and be on the panel with the task force. As a new agency, this is our first meeting that we've been a part of. So we're really excited to be here and be a part of this ongoing collaboration and coordination. Also wanted to thank the San Diego Zoo Safari Park for hosting us and the San Pasqual Band of Mission Indians. Wanted to just acknowledge the prior panel because it was such an impactful panel, and especially the 2 women tribal leaders on the panel and the lived experience they brought to the table, and really challenged all of us, especially as a new state department, to be better and to really acknowledge and recognize our relationship to the history of the state of California. So thank you for those that were on the panel. Energy safety. So as a new department, we were created in the wake of the 2017 and 2018 wildfires, several of which were caused by utility infrastructure. So after those fires, the legislature and the Newsom administration passed an update updated Public Utilities Code that created a new safety regulatory framework that focused on incentivizing electrical corporations on investing in improved safety outcomes. That the main tool is the Wildfire Mitigation Plan. Many of you might be aware of that plan. Our department is tasked with evaluating those plans and approving, and then ultimately holding the utilities accountable for implementing those plans. So I'm really excited today to get to be able to talk about how the evolution of that plan has happened over just the last few years, right? This is still a very new thing, but as was mentioned, these plans are massive investments that the utilities are doing. And we want to make sure that from a regulatory perspective, as we're evaluating those plans and pushing the utilities to continue maturing their wildfire mitigation efforts, that we're pushing them in a direction that amplifies that investment in the larger landscape of wildfire mitigation and benefiting the communities that they're in. So what we do is we evaluate those plans. We also set the guidelines and the requirements for those plans. Those plans are 3-year plans. So the first 3-year plan was submitted in 2020 that covered 2020 to 2022. And we just last year, the utilities submitted their second 3-year plan, 23 to 25, that we reviewed and evaluated over the last year. And we are now working on the guidelines for the submission of their third 3-year plan that will be submitted in 2020 or 2025, excuse me. So what I'm really looking forward to in the discussion and from the community here and being part of this community is how can we uplift those current guidelines for the next plan and get contributions and comments and stakeholder engagement so that we can, as the utilities are submitting those plans, really focus all of those efforts on broadening the coordination and collaboration that they're doing with their local community partners. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And thinking more broadly about wildfire risk to infrastructure, David, I want to jump back to you because we heard this morning that CAL FIRE San Diego inspects something like 40,000 properties a year, which is just incredible in my mind. And I read on your website, on SCE's website, that you all manage about 900,000 trees a year and inspect them. About half of those are in high fire zones, and you prune about 700,000 to maintain your infrastructure corridors. And just given SCE's large operation that's really focused on power line management, how does SCE really think about managing exposure to wildfire risk, not just from ignitions from infrastructure or your infrastructure, but also more broadly from wildfire risk from the landscape?
Appreciate it. So we have a few things that are part of our wildfire mitigation plan that will address that. And one of them is our expansion to our pole clearing, pole structure program that we have going on. We mitigate probably about 120,000 poles on clearing poles and towers that were related to potential propagation of a wildfire. However, expanded plan, actually we mitigate poles and clear the structures that are related to critical circuits with critical infrastructure associated to them, hospitals, police stations, all those types of locations where we're clearing poles for defensible space. And we're trying to mitigate the impacts to our structure so we can restore power quickly in those particular areas. We also, have a very comprehensive environmental compliance program. First of all, as we have all the people out there working, we go through a heavy clearance, understanding the resources within the environmental sensitive areas that we're working in, making sure that we have the proper instruction for mitigation. Sometimes we're out there with biologists, archaeologists, different people there to support our efforts and ensure that we're doing all the right things with the waterways that we're working around, our overland use permits that we're doing. We're definitely looking at how we traveling through these areas, what we're doing to lessen the impacts of our egress and ingress, or ingress and egress, making sure that our plans are trying to use trails that are already in place, but basically making sure that we don't have heavy impacts in those particular areas as well. We also are trying to, definitely reap the benefits of what we've already accomplished through our enhanced clearance efforts. We definitely are able to broaden our cycles, our maintenance cycles in areas because of our enhanced clearances, lessening the impacts of the trees that we're touching in those areas that were affected. Things like that. Outside in a broader spectrum too, as the utility, we work with different agencies like the National Forest Foundation as well to, basically contribute there and support their efforts with reforestations and things like that. So there's definitely a lot of things and activities that we're doing to try and support the overall broader, broader direction that we're headed as a utility and as a group here that we're working with.
Thank you, David. And extending that line of thinking where, you've really got linear infrastructure. Lisa, when thinking about roads, there was a 2021 report out of UC Davis talking about in the prior 5 years, the Department of Transportation spent about $500 million repairing and replacing roads from fires that had happened during that time period. And, when you think about your time and your tenure at Caltrans, that was 4 years ago. And I'm wondering how, you've really seen road infrastructure exposure to wildfire change over time during your time there. And what are the other impacts that aren't really as directly visible as just road damage from fire?
Great questions. Appreciate the facts too. The billions of dollars to restore state highways back to an original safe condition from the cause of wildfire also include post-fire debris flows, mudslides, etc. So it's not purely from the incident, it's the post-incident vulnerability of the watershed itself, as we all know. There still is that factor that affects communities far after communities are repopulated. So Caltrans would like to move the thinking forward and put more money, and we are, in mitigation and planning efforts at the community scale, meaning not just looking at the right-of-way that we legally own, broadening that to what's the community context where the highway corridors are located, that would drive a strategic shaded fuel break need, not only within our right-of-way, which is highly variable in width, but also broader to make a difference as a dual benefit, right? A protective feature for what's referred to, I heard it for the first time just in the last month, the shadow effect of treatments. I hadn't really thought about that. We're measuring acres of actual treatments, but not so much the shadow effect, the benefit areas. So highways have that direct benefit of protecting because they are linear, just like ridges, roads, and rivers are all linear. They have that benefit of a shadow effect. So we do need stakeholder input. We're looking and leaning primarily on those who have extensive, intimate knowledge of fire behavior modeling and fire return departure, incident departure, to help us find those segments where they would be most valuable right now. We also would love to do the right thing in the right place, meaning we're different than utility companies in all our infrastructure is on the ground. So there's not a risk of ignition from above. It's from the vehicles. It's from the use of the infrastructure by the traveling public that's using highways every single day, 24/7, 365. How do we modify that behavior? CAL FIRE has an excellent campaign called One Less Spark. How do we amplify that to pass on responsibility like home hardening is to the property owner level, to the vehicle user level, since ignitions from vehicles are not within our control, but it is within the control of those using those vehicles from unplanned ignitions from typically a disabled vehicle that might pull off the highway right of way, or a trailer improperly chained. We also have a lot of unsheltered or homeless encampments within the highway right of way, lighting fires to keep warm, et cetera, that sometimes escape and cause damage to our infrastructure, but then also become a problem. So reducing ignitions definitely warrants an enhanced public information campaign jointly with CAL FIRE. We know that. How can we do that in the next fiscal year? We'd love to explore that more. But our fuels modification, that's within our control. So all the additional regional resource toolkit data that Chief Porter, Tom referred to, that never existed before, analyzing that at a corridor level and trying to fit that into other priorities of the community wildfire protection plans or the unit fire plans or the forest management plans, where there is a synchronicity or a nexus with the state highway segment. We're looking to enhance what other agencies have already identified as a priority for them, where the highways can be part of that solution. So we can put money and people to work. All of the acres that you currently see on the interagency treatment dashboard right now, the last 3 years, we've had over 100,000 acres of treatment. It's all our field crews, all of our field crews that have been optimized, encouraged to rent equipment, to do more, just basic fuels reduction, more frequent mowing. Are they doing the mowing in the right time of year, in the right frequency? Are we really addressing invasive plant and weed management enough through tools such as prescribed fire by inviting cultural practitioners and CAL FIRE, prescribed fire burn crews to come onto our highway right of way so they can use beneficial fire to control grassy, flashy fuels? Another opportunity. We've had the blessing of our executives to put contracts out to bid where the fuels are too complex for our own crews and tree crews to do. And we've had an unbelievable response from LTOs, licensed timber operators, 27 bidding on our contracts, driving the cost per acre down to do those really heavy timber related THP projects where they're warranted. So those are all the things we're looking to do to push the money forward into mitigation and planning, but definitely not looking to be siloed, but to be integrated in the context. And where is all of that happening? It's happening through our 12 districts. Caltrans has 12 districts, and now there's a senior vegetation management program lead who's your single point of contact in each Caltrans district that can assist you no matter where you are in your organizational structure in the state of California. There is a Caltrans point of contact in 12 districts in California. So look to them if you want to. All of the conversations that I had during lunch and in between breaks, et cetera, where we want to do this type of project and include the state highway, but we're not quite sure how to crack the nut of who to talk to or how to involve Caltrans. So you have a local contact now. They're all here. We're all wearing badges. I would love a way to maybe enhance the task force site with some contact information. So not only data is shared, but then perhaps the who is responsible for the agencies to help use that data responsibly. So just some thoughts.
Great,
Thank
thank you, Lisa. And Lisa mentioned to me that 33 members of Caltrans were attending today. So if you haven't run into one yet, you haven't been walking around enough. Now I'd like to take it back to Greg, something you had mentioned where, your water supply for your million residents that you support through your agency comes from the Santa Ana watershed. It's an area where I know you've developed a habitat conservation plan. I know that Susie from Inland Empire Resource Conservation District mentioned the Headwaters Resiliency Partnership there. Could you talk a little bit about San Bernardino Valley's participation in that group and maybe your vision and the agency's vision for thinking about what involvement from the utility side looks like in upper headwaters management?
Tie that briefly to what you see on the screen there. So that's a map of our watershed, the Santa Ana River watershed. It extends from the Big Bear Lake area in the upper watershed through the cities of San Bernardino, Riverside, down through Anaheim and goes out to the Pacific Ocean at the boundary of Newport Beach and Huntington Beach. And so both for our habitat conservation plan that we're developing and also the Headwaters Resiliency Project, from a very, very simple but important perspective, groundwater agencies or water management agencies in the Santa Ana River watershed are heavily reliant on groundwater. And to manage groundwater, we recharge groundwater. So we divert water from the Santa Ana River and other tributaries, and we recharge that into our groundwater basin. And the red polygons there are the polygons from the 2003 fires, which were a very extensive, extreme, catastrophic wildfire in those areas. So the result of that fire, followed by the rains in the next rainy season, were very significant sediment loads. So the picture there is a picture from the Orange County Water District, which is a picture of the Santa Ana River, and very, very high sediment loads, whether it's measured as turbidity or total suspended solids. So the little structure that's on the left there is actually an inflatable dam. And normally the inflatable dam would be up to divert water off of the river so that the water can be recharged into the groundwater basin in Anaheim adjacent to the river. So take water out of the river with this inflatable dam. The dam is lowered because the sediment load is so high, you can't use that water. If you diverted this water into your recharge basins, they would clog in a matter of hours and would not infiltrate. So this is probably one of the most noteworthy impacts from a groundwater supply manager's perspective on why we need to do projects and programs to minimize the risk of catastrophic wildfire. And so both our habitat conservation plan and our Headwaters Resiliency Program are targeted to work together with all the stakeholders in the forest, and they're extensive, and the Headwaters Resiliency Program has helped us work together to develop relationships and programs so that now a water district like us has 10 projects in the San Bernardino Regional Priority Plan. So our water agency sees the connection very clearly between water management and reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfire. The Habitat Conservation Plan has really helped out also too, because we have biologists who manage lands. What that HCP is a program where we do improvements and ecosystem restoration enhancement projects to offset the impact of water resources projects. So the environment is better at the end. It improves the environment. And so because of our program with the HCP, we have biologists that walk the land. We're looking at fish restoration projects, putting fish back into rivers. We're looking at non-native plant removal. And these all tie back very closely to forest health. But as we have our, an example is as we have our biologists walk the land, they meet the landowners. We can't, for example, reintroduce fish into tributaries if we don't connect with all the landowners. So by doing that, we've really developed a mechanism and a relationship with landowners to work together with them and then pull additional landowners into the Headwaters Resiliency Partnership. And it strengthens our connections with all the relevant entities, and in particular, in this case, the landowners.
Thanks for that, Greg. And I know we talk about partnership a lot, and particularly at meetings like this, and a lot of times it's high level, and a lot of times it's everybody loves everybody, and we're all going to work together, and then we leave and we go do our own thing. So I appreciate your involvement in that partnership and what you're looking to do in that space. And really thinking of that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom, in the sense of you've served in leadership positions at both CAL FIRE and now at SDG&E. And you've lived through a lot of partnership building and maybe partnership falling apart. I mean, maybe I'll call it apart. And so I think, how do we take this high level discussion of we want to do partnerships, we want to be better at partnerships and capacity building and funding, and what are the functional steps that we need to do as agencies and utilities to get that done on the ground at both the local level and really at the regional level that your utility and agencies operate at?
Well, this is a great question, and I'm going to take it a couple of different ways. First, and if you are out there developing regulations or signing off on regulations, tuning regulations, know that in retirement, it may come back as something you wish you would have done a different way. And it's not because of, it's not because now I'm looking at it from a utility perspective. It's because I'm seeing that sometimes we go a little bit overboard and we get a little too prescriptive in that space that takes away some of the flexibility that would maybe at least it stifles innovation in some cases, but it also changes the type of tools you have to tune your product that you're trying to get out the other end. And what I'm going to say to this is we talk about diminishing returns as we start to get closer and closer to an outcome that is good enough. And what I'm going to say to that is we've been spending billions of dollars over the last several decades, a decade and a half in San Diego, $5 billion spent in this space of reducing the risk of our system being the cause of wildfires. And 2007 was it. 2007 was the point in time when San Diego Gas and Electric had its wildfire in recent history, the Witch Fire, Witch Wajito. And that changed the entire trajectory of SDG&E. So in the 15 years hence, and I wasn't in this seat for 13 of those years, but $5 billion has been spent in hardening the infrastructure to a point where we will not cause wildfires. Yeah, it's not that we can't, but the intent is that we will not be the cause of any wildfires. PSPS is part of that program. That's public safety power shutoff. That's the last resort. Turn off the power in a place where our system we know is compromised or can't take the weather system that's coming in, wind, Santa Ana's. But our intent is to get to that point of diminishing returns. We've decided or determined, excuse me, through analysis that that's 83%. 83% hardened, undergrounded, not a hazard for starting a wildfire in a windy situation with dry fuels. So 83%, where are we today? About 50%, about. So we're looking at that next 33% is our push, and we intend to be done with that by 2031 and in a maintenance cycle that we'll support that. So then we manage that last 17% with that PSPS and or other types of things, fuels reduction programs, big one. So SDG&E, since the Sunrise Power Link project, which was in the early 2000s, before 2005, through that period, we developed a grant program and we have $350 million that will go into that program not year in and year out, but that is funding that program over a 50-year window. So through 2050, roughly. And that money goes to fuel reduction projects within the communities. Registered professional forester here in San Diego manages that for us and is in conjunction with the efforts that we've all been talking about. Actually was part of the FAST group when it started. We also follow the National Association of State, National Arbor Day Foundation, Tree Line USA. We do Right Tree, Right Place. We have tree planting programs that are all part of this with again, selecting the right plants for the right part of the territory that we're in, and also making sure that they're not going to be a problem that is exacerbating fire spread or those kind of things. So these are the kind of things that we're doing. I know SCE is also doing a lot of these programs. It's not an SDG&E specific effort. And I think what we need to, I talked about it previously, the funding can't be the thing that makes this kind of an effort go away. And I know Blue Forest is a huge contributing member to looking for ways to model ongoing funding efforts for this. The utilities are in it completely for what we can be in it for. And I'm going to just give two thoughts that I think are important from the perspective of the utilities. We are severely challenged right now in the cost to do the business that we do, and how that cost gets pushed down to ratepayers, customers, all of you, me. And it's a real issue for us. And we have to do the things that we need to do to protect the costs of damage to or costs of fire starting from our infrastructure. Outside of that is something that we absolutely need to partner to. But we can't have ratepayers paying for that effort. So what I'm kind of bringing this back to is the holistic approach is that we all need to be maintaining these collaboratives like we have, the regional collaborative, and finding those places where we're not overlapping, but we're feathering to each other, and we're making sure that we aren't duplicating efforts where we can be collaborative and bridge those gaps.
Thank you, Tom. And one, appreciate your comments, and two, recognize that a lot of the costs that we're asking to share are passed on to somebody, usually taxpayers or ratepayers. And so the question is, how do we maximize our investments collectively for those same taxpayers and ratepayers in a way that I think we all look to save them, and by them you mean, and I mean us, money in the long run. So thank you. Caroline, thinking about your agency as the newest agency and the ability to do it right, would love to get your thoughts before we turn it over to the executive committee for their questions. How do you think about partnerships and collaboration? I mean, you've only been in existence for a couple of years, and most of that's probably been scrambling to set up what that agency even looks like. But now that you've got, a bit of a foothold, you're starting to work more with utilities. Where do you see those collaboration opportunities going forward, given the amount of investment that we're talking about in this space from both state agencies as well as utilities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's a really important question to ask. So yes, obviously, as a new entity, there was a lot, and for the utilities doing the wildfire mitigation plans, the first couple of times, there was a lot of just trying to get everyone's feet underneath them. But one of the things that we implemented from day one with the evaluation of the plans is what we call a maturity model. So we always knew that the plans, which I want to be really clear, are individual utility or electrical corporation plans. So it's the corporation's plan to do something. So it's not regulation, general orders, but it's their plan. We said, hey, you're building something new here in terms of the way you approach wildfire risk. So that means that there needs to be a process of continuous improvement and maturity over time. So through this maturity model, the utilities literally, when they submit the plan, have to submit their responses to this survey and say, okay, here's on these specific capabilities, including coordination with stakeholders, coordination with local government, coordination with emergency planning and public safety partners. Here's what we can do today. And after this 3-year plan investment, here's what we think we're going to be able to do 3 years from now. And then we measure them over time and hold them accountable to that. So the stage that I would say that we're at now, again, that they're in the middle of implementing their second 3-year plan and they're about to submit their next 3-year plan, this is the time where all of us, I think, collectively have our feet under us, and we need to be building those partnerships and pushing even further into institutionalizing that collaboration. So a couple things that we're doing. So as a new state agency, and my natural resource agency colleagues probably can attest to this. I've spent the last year getting to know all my peers, right? Like, hey, this is who we are. This is what we do. Come invite us to your meetings, right? And Lisa's laughing over there because that's what I do. Like, I'm making sure that within the state family that folks know we exist, right? So we're coordinating with the task force now, with the different work groups, the fire adaptive communities. We're getting a seat at that table to include our thoughts on that. So internally within state government, we're making sure we're doing that coordination. But what I want to build out is go in this next evolution of the plans. Again, we set the requirements for those plans of what they need to tell us they're doing. We don't tell them what to do, but they need to tell us. We say, tell us what you're doing. I want to hear from stakeholders what should be those next questions we're asking, right? So make us smarter on how we can ask the good questions or require the information in the plan to for the utilities to show us how they're doing that coordination. So that's the next step in the evolution of strengthening the coordination on these different planning activities and making sure that all of the investment is being amplified within the community for the benefit of the larger community.
Thank you, Caroline. And I know we have a lot more to discuss with the panel up here, but given the time, and I know everybody's eager to enjoy the park, I wanted to turn it over to you, Jen, and the exec committee to weigh in with your thoughts and your questions.
Thanks. So great comments and thoughts. And I'm going to start out just with a observations question as well. So Lisa, thanks so much for the integration comment, because that's what we're all trying to do here. And you're absolutely right. How do we all work together? How do we have the integration around it? Also, I'd say that all of you are likely more on the cutting edge of managing avoidance cost, in the sense of that. What do we all want when we have an emergency? Is my water good? When's my power coming back on? And do I have access? So you guys, all your companies, your organizations, your agencies really lead out on that. So what I'm getting to is, Tom, a little bit of what you said, the pendulum swings sometimes on the funding. And we've had this back and forth, we're trying to stabilize as much as possible. How, in your experience, we've gone through these swings a bit. How do we keep this momentum going? Knowing that you're looking at, we all are, avoidance costs. If we put some in, here's what's going to save us, if you call us that in the future, whether it's risk, communities, literally economic costs. Thoughts on how we maintain, how do we move through times, eras that swing? I ended on a light one for y'all.
I'll go
ahead,
first.
Lisa.
So we've often talked about not all acres are equal acres. So we need to prioritize those. We've been talking about that. Patrick talked about that extensively. The regional benefit of planning is you have priorities that are collaboratively determined and concurred with as being a priority for that region. So that then therefore ranks acres and makes those priorities more of a priority in lean times. So I would say that's how we get to maintain the still high values when we have less funds to spend. Also, we're a public landowner, Caltrans is, so we have to figure out a way to keep the highways open and operating safely. Safe is always at the top of our priorities. life, infrastructure, ecosystem services. We say them in that order. We're talking about humans, we're talking about the communities and infrastructure and lifelines and et cetera, and then the ecosystems that connect us all together. When you reverse it and you say, well, there is no life and no community living if we don't have a healthy ecosystem that's in place, then suddenly everybody has the same values. We all depend on those ecosystems, no matter whether we're a utility company or we're a transportation agency or state parks or CAL FIRE. It really doesn't matter. So flipping it over, climate stressors are something we're looking at in that same lens. Which of the climate stressors are causing bigger risks to the transportation infrastructure right now? Clearly, it's wildfire, but there's also a ton of variability of precipitation that's causing mass flooding, overtopping our capacity of our culverts to handle the flow of that stormwater, causing erosion downstream. So not to say that that's a manageable prediction, but it's something that affects us all. So again, bringing that into the equation, land management, ecosystem values, and the climate stressors, what we know and can predict, are likely to affect the healthy outcomes of those things. We all have that in common, no matter where we sit. So I'll just open it up for other reflections.
I think this particular task force is exactly the beginning or exactly where they're headed in that direction. Understanding where we've been successful, where we need to get better, and being transparent with that. I think we listen to what we've heard here today and continue to listen to communities and areas that we haven't really mastered what we're doing or been able to accomplish what we want to be able to accomplish in those areas based to their satisfaction and the needs of others as well is what we need to continue to do in order to get better. Us as a utility has a big responsibility and a stewardship. We've already left a footprint of areas that we've had incidents and things that have been caused. And so we definitely want to make sure that we're aware of those and understand what we're trying to prevent is one thing, but also trying to repair is another thing. So I think if we are honest on that, we can basically focus on what needs to be focused on, and to hopefully get the funding and support needed in those areas through that transparency.
All right, first from utility perspective, we as utilities are doing these wildfire mitigation plans, and that is a plan that we are committing to that is proactively put in front of Caroline and her staff. And then we are graded on how we're doing with that. So utility perspective, company. We make a plan, we're going to put the money to meeting the plan. That's where I'm coming from, and we'll continue to do that. And there are some nuances to those plans that give us some opportunities to adjust. We've got some new regulation that allows us to have other plans about strategic undergrounding or targeted undergrounding or whatever we're calling it these days. But undergrounding, which changes a lot of what we're talking about. If we underground, we come out of the we're no longer a partner in fuels management along that linear corridor, because we're not going to do fuels management except for maybe around the structures. But we don't have that overhead. I'm just throwing that out as one of the things that does change, and we need to all be thinking about these things. So our cost profile and our investment in that activity doesn't happen on those pieces of ground. But it's what we're doing to manage the dollars that we have and the long-term costs of doing these things that we are committed absolutely to do. I think from the taking SDG&E off for a second and having a chance to reflect on what the task force has had to wrangle with, and the flood of money that's come. But now what's that going to look like downstream? And we all, in government, that's the boom and bust cycle that we live in. I think that the partnerships and the conversation, particularly we just had an hour and a half ago, is huge in this. We have to get the fuels management and the long-term management of the landscape back in the hands of the people who are available and capable of doing that. In many cases, that's indigenous peoples. In some cases, it's ranchers. In some other cases, it's timber companies and industry. And this is exactly the same conversation that I was referencing that is happening in British Columbia. And I think there's a synergy there that is ripe for discussion, because they're pouring money in now knowing that they don't have enough money to do everything they need to do for decades to come.
Thank you. So I know anybody have one comment, question before? Okay, I want to thank our panel, our last panel. Thank you so much, you guys. This was fantastic.